If Broncos rookie quarterback Bo Nix isn't starting week 1 for the team, does that mean that the process this offseason was a failure? We'll tell you why we believe that's not the case here on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's up? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. And just a reminder, you can get this show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So if you're a brand new listener or viewer of the show, make sure you subscribe or you follow so you never miss out on a day's worth of Broncos news, analysis, content coverage, and more, all from an objective point of view. You get to hear every single day. Oh, you're like, because for the true fan, there is never an offseason. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. I cover the team person in daily in Dove Valley, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger. He's the site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. You want to share your thoughts? You want to know what's going on with the team? You want different thoughts and point of views? Well, Sayre brings that over there at predominantlyorange.com, so make sure you check out his work there, as well as milehighsports.com for my written work as well. And look, Broncos Country, it is mailbag edition of the show here today. We got some really good questions in from the avid listeners all across Broncos Country, but Sayre, one stood out to me in a way that I feel like we probably have to headline this because there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of hype, and rightfully so. Like, the Broncos haven't been in a position, I feel like, for quite some time, Sayre, really probably since the Russell Wilson trade actually happened. The moment it happened, there hasn't been a moment like Broncos Country is experiencing right now with the excitement level behind a quarterback like Bo Nix after they drafted him. And obviously we've seen it here in the last couple of weeks, the excitement ramping up a little bit. He had an impressive start at rookie minicamp. But overall, if he's not starting week 1, would the process by the Broncos be considered a failure? This question comes in from Tim Wenz on Twitter. I feel like there's going to be a lot of different answers to this depending on like whether you answer it, whether I answer it. And I think from fans are going to have their different perspectives as well. But I mean, I'm curious. Let's start off with you here. Would it be a failure in terms of the process if Bo isn't starting week 1 here for the team?
Well, I think, yeah, to me, Cody, I think the question, the way that it was asked, it's like, if he doesn't beat out Stidham and Wilson handily, was the process a failure? And I get what Tim, our good friend Tim, is asking there. I just don't think that there should really be like as much of an open-mindedness by this coaching staff that Bo Nix shouldn't be the week 1 starter. I think that should be the end game here. And what happens up to that point is it shouldn't be a situation where the team is sacrificing reps in practice for Bo Nix and they're, really trying to squeeze whatever they can out of Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson even. I think the plan is clear. The minute you drafted Bo Nix, that guy is your starting quarterback. You took the guy that everybody says the most NFL ready. I think even Bill Belichick said that. He's one of the most NFL ready guys in this class. I mean, the proof is what it is at this point. I guess the question is a little bit more nuanced than, the whole process and everything. Like, what is the Broncos? We don't know exactly what their process is going to be like. I will say this, if he's not starting in week 1 because the Broncos pitted him against Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson in practices and it didn't go well, then I will say maybe the answer is yes, that the process and the whole plan was a bit flawed in the first place.
You see, even though I think you and I are in the same thought process here on what we think should happen. I think we both agree that Bo should be the starting quarterback week 1 regardless. Like, in our opinion, you and I have done an episode of the show here where it's like, all right, really the true competition at quarterback shouldn't be for the starting job. It should be for the backup job behind Bo Nix. Because look, for Sean Payton, you go out and you do these things this offseason. Obviously, he's gotten a lot of high praise. Sean Payton's given Bo a lot of high praise. Probably more so than he has, I think, some of these other guys. But, I think Sean in his presser, even after rookie minicamp, he methodically mentions Jarrett and he methodically mentions Zach Wilson as well, just as like, hey, like, let's not ignore these guys. But for me, I don't think the process would be a failure. Now, I think a lot of people, and I've seen these comments here, and I understand where people are coming from, but you're seeing a lot of comparisons. Well, look what Patrick Mahomes did for a year. He sat behind Alex Smith. Broncos Country, there is no Alex Smith at the quarterback position on the Broncos roster currently. There is no Jake Plummer on the Broncos roster currently in terms of where you have a young guy like Jay Cutler sitting. So like for me, it's you need to do whatever you can to make sure Bo gets as many reps as possible. Now I'll tell you this, going through training camp last year, you saw where I remember him was tracking the first team, the second team, third team. Like I would remember charting things. There would be 21 plays that are going on, Sayre, and the first teamo would get 7 plays, second teamo would get 7 plays, third teamo would get 7 plays, and then they're done. Like I don't know if Sean is going to change up from that. Like that's one thing I'm very curious to see is he going to go with the same formula he did his last training camp here in Denver, or is he going to say, okay, hey, first team offense, we're going to give Bo a ton of reps here. He's going to get 14 reps. The other guys are going to get like 5 and 5, right? If they expand the palette in terms of the number of plays that they're running at practice, they push that out a little bit. Because the reality is, as much as the offense is benefiting from getting reps on the field, the defense is benefiting from getting as many reps on the field as well. So where do things kind of come to a head here? I mean, really, last year, there was no question that Russell Wilson was going to be the starter for Denver, and that's how they operated. I don't know, like, if you're giving a guy 7 plays at QB, like, is that enough? Like, I don't feel like that's a big enough sample size. Now, I think when you put the volume together, when you combine all the practices, of course, maybe you're going to see a little bit more. You're going to have the 7-on-7 periods, the 11-on-11 periods. But ideally, what Sean Payton should be doing right now, and maybe he's planning on doing this. Like, we're a ways out from training camp. We won't know until it happens. But maybe he is planning on building this out to where it's like, hey, Bo's going to get every first opportunity. But also you have to give opportunities to Zach Wilson. You have to give opportunities to Jarrett Stidham. You have to do right by those guys as well. But to me, the moment that the Broncos took a quarterback 12th overall in the NFL draft, Sarah, to me, that spoke volumes of saying, hey, based on what they have around Bo Nix right now, this is a good start for them. Why not give him every opportunity to be the guy right away? And look, even if he struggles as a rookie, it doesn't mean that it was a failed pick. In my opinion, you let him take his lumps early versus like expanding your runway a little bit. Now, I think that's probably going to be a little bit more of an important element to talk about.
It is. And I think, look, you almost wish the Broncos would just do what the Chicago Bears did with Caleb Williams, right? And just
Why
declare
not?
him the starter. Yeah, right away. Because, yeah, why not it's the appropriate question. Because why not? I mean, you really going to trot out Jarrett Stidham for a couple of weeks? Are you really? I mean, with Zach Wilson, I could maybe understand it because you traded for him and he was the 2nd overall pick just a couple years ago. And if there is a legitimate competition going on and one of those guys really goes out there and just blows up at training camp and is like, man, this guy's not missing any throws. And then he gets on the field in preseason and he's just picking people apart. I mean, that's one of the only instances in which I would say one of those two guys, meaning Stidham or Wilson, should be even considered as the starter this year. The other circumstance, which is, again, there's only two. It's either one of those guys blows up or number 2, Bo Nix just flat out looks terrible in the offseason program, which I don't think is going to happen, especially now that he's been compared to a good golfer by his own head coach. It's just like the guy is borderline boring out there on the field based on the way that he plays the game and the way that he plays the quarterback position, according to Sean Payton, right? I mean, he's methodical. He does things so well. He's bringing out the pitching wedge and he's able to hit the green every time. And then he busts out the driver and you're like, how does he hit it exactly where it's in the middle of the fairway every single time? It's not even fun to golf with this guy. That's exactly how Bo Nix is at the position. So I just don't see him bottoming out in training camp. I guess the third avenue would be injury to Bo Nix, which we don't need at all. So let's just, we're knocking on the wood or whatever we got here. But Cody, those are the only instances in which I can see a justification for him not being the week 1 starter. Mike Kliss, our good friend over there at 9 News, he had stated that Bo is not going to open up the offseason program ahead of Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham at the position, but that he basically said the goal is to get him there at some point this year. And what does that mean? That's super vague. I hope that by this year he means by mid to late July when we can start getting him those reps, because you don't want to sacrifice the opportunity to develop him just for the sake of some fabricated makeshift competition that was never a competition to begin with.
The last thing I also want to see is them using a process where they bring in Bo as kind of like a Taysom Hill option while they have another quarterback in, right? You know how Drew Brees in his last couple of years would be leading the team, to midfield. And all of a sudden, once you get to midfield, Sean's like, all right, Taysom, get in. Like, you don't want to see that happen. Like, there's no need to play games with 2 quarterbacks in this year. Like, make one guy the guy and roll from there. Like, take your lumps as they go, because, I think the best overall value is for Nix to get as much experience as possible here by being the guy getting those reps. And obviously, there's going to be a lot of pieces around him, which also brings to our next question that we're going to get to on today's mailbag. Broncos Country asks, what will the wide receiver depth chart look like come week one? We'll take a little bit of an early peek at that on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. And as you all know, FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, it's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own as the NBA playoffs and NHL playoffs commence. And there are more games going on that are setting up for the conference finals in both sports. Well, FanDuel is the perfect place to get in on the action because things are hectic. Things are crazy. And that's where FanDuel comes in handy because right now, new customers, they get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. You place a $5 bet on a money line, player props, or even spreads, and that bet wins. If you sign up as a new customer, you're going to get $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So get in on the action for the playoff season inside the NBA and the NHL with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook.
We're breaking down the pecking order at the wide receiver position for the Denver Broncos in 2024. Who's going to take the lion's share of snaps? Who's going to catch the most passes? Who's going to be out on the field the most? Cody and I are going to talk about that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But want to say thank you and give a shout out to all of you listeners of Locked On Broncos, especially all of you everydayers and those that make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. Every single day. We appreciate every single one of you for listening and subscribing everywhere that you get your podcasts on any platform, as well as on YouTube, where, man, things are popping right now. So if you're watching on YouTube, we appreciate every single one of you as well. And if you haven't already, go over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button and join the growing community of Broncos fans over there. And Cody, let's talk about this. This is one of the more popular questions we received in terms of today's mailbag, is the wide receiver position for the Denver Broncos, and specifically, like, what is the depth chart going to look like? And I'm fascinated by this as well because we saw a lot of different guys play last year, basically out of necessity. We haven't really seen a solidified depth chart at wide receiver for the Broncos for the last, I don't even know how many years, right? Because injuries have played a factor. Breakout players like Tim Patrick a couple years ago played a factor. What do you see as the depth chart at wide receiver looking like going into 2024?
Yeah, this is a great question. I was sent in from Jeff Stanberry, and also Eric B. also kind of put a little bit of this into his question as well. Like for me, I look at if the Broncos have a solidified foundation, which, look, talking about foundation, yesterday's episode of Locked On Broncos, we even talked about like the 2024 draft class could be the foundation that Sean Payton needs to really get things going here. Now, I think maybe we can take this to another level here, right? You talk about a solidified depth chart at wide receiver, and this was hard because the Broncos have a lot of guys right now. Sayre, if I had to take a little bit of a gander at it, making sure they keep 6 guys, like just based on right now, Courtland Sutton, obviously #1, Tim Patrick, Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin, Josh Reynolds, and Devon Vele, the rookie out of Utah. I feel like if these were the 6 guys that were headlining the position room here for Denver, I'd feel okay with that. And then I think obviously you look at, you have guys on the practice squad. Would that be little Jordan Humphrey? Would Jalen Virgil be able to make it, out of the practice squad? Or would another team try to scoop him up? Like there's so many different things we got to factor in. That would be my solidified depth chart. If I had to give like an early prediction right now, Sayre, that's how mine would play out. Do you agree with that? And are you, like, where do you stand with it? And do you have anything different than what I have?
Mine's just a little bit different. I think when the Broncos open up in their 3 wide sets this offseason, I think the top 3 guys out there, I guess if they're all in attendance, would be Courtland Sutton, Marvin Mims, and then Josh Reynolds. I think Reynolds was kind of an underrated pickup from the Detroit Lions in free agency. The Broncos went out and got him, obviously, a little bit earlier in the offseason, so you kind of figure he was a priority addition to the team, not just a, hey, let's add this guy, he's still sitting there. Feels like he was kind of a bit more of a priority. And I do think at #4, I have Tim Patrick. I think he's going to be eased along, as you and I have talked about in the past. I mean, there's not necessarily a huge reason to go and rush him into playing 700 snaps or something like that. I think we're going to see Tim eased into the lineup, although I wouldn't be shocked at all to see him, as you have him, as number 2. It's Sutton and Patrick on the outside, and then Mims kind of moving around. That wouldn't surprise me at all, but I have Tim right now as my number 4, and then number 5 and 6 are the rookies, Franklin and Vele. That's how I kind of see the depth chart playing out as far as when we open training camp. Now, over the course of a season, I wouldn't be surprised to see Franklin be number 3 on the team in terms of overall snaps at receiver. I just think he's that good. So I'm fascinated by this. I'm intrigued by all the personnel groupings. I think that's maybe something to pay more attention to, right? It's like if you're, a fan of a great basketball team and your sixth man is one of your best players, and it's like, well, he's not even a starter. That's kind of, it doesn't necessarily matter because he's going to get on the field for a lot of snaps, right? So that's how I view the Broncos receiver position. Is more of like, hey, what are the personnel groupings that you're going to use, as opposed to who's going to be on the field the most.
Part of me also feels like if we look back at last year, that's exactly how Sean Payton operated. It was more personnel groupings than it was like, all right, hey, Cortland and Tim are, wide receivers 1 and 2. They're going to be on the field all the time. Like, no, they rotated in guys heavily. And I think that alongside Kiri Colbert, they have a pretty good system in place. Now, a little bit of a wild card question that was thrown in here. Somebody also asked about Vele and whether or not he can maybe play tight end. Look, obviously he's got size. I mean, maybe he could. I just don't see them moving him from that role of wide receiver. And to be honest with you, I think putting him at tight end, unless you're trying to put him in the slot or on the outside, then, there's no point in moving him or giving him a position change, designation there. I think that Denver's going in with the guys that they already have right now, to be honest with you. You're going to have the Adam Troutmans. You're going to have the Dulciches, the Lucas Krolls, the Nate Atkins, and maybe one of these undrafted guys will maybe make some noise a little bit during the offseason. As you know, the Broncos were granted was international exemption for Thomas Yasmin, who's obviously from Sydney, Australia. So he doesn't necessarily count against your roster, and that could be something that the Broncos maybe use on the practice squad for the entire season. We'll see how that plays out. But as we continue maybe our conversation, tying this into where things are at here, Trill Cruz on Twitter sent us in a question asking, is it in the Broncos' best interest to trade Sutton? It seems like he's trying to get traded. To be honest with you, Sayre, I'm not necessarily looking at it as like Cortland is trying to get traded. I think Cortland wants to get paid, and rightfully so. But I think Cortland is also of the mindset, well, if you're not going to pay me, then, I'm going to hold out and then try to force you to trade me. And maybe that is what's in the best interest of both teams. Like, how do you feel about this question?
I don't think Cortland is trying to get traded, honestly, and especially after reading the report from Mike Kliss the other night, where he dropped a post saying that, hey, Cortland essentially exactly what you said, Cody. He wants to get paid. He wants more guaranteed money, and he's not necessarily looking for a trade. He hasn't asked for a trade at this point, which is, I think, notable in this whole discussion. The fact that he could ask for a trade, as we've heard, T. Higgins asked for a trade and Trey Hendrickson asked for a trade. And there was even rumors that Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel, I mean, all these guys are reportedly or rumored to be asking for trades. That's never been the case for Cortland Sutton, which I find to be very interesting in this whole discussion. But I don't think it's necessarily in the Broncos' best interest to trade him. I mean, maybe if you could have got a 3rd round pick in this year's draft, then I would say, yeah, maybe make that deal, because if he doesn't want to be there and you can get a 3rd round pick, it's kind of a win-win, but at this stage, it's like, well, now you've got a young quarterback in the mix, and your best receivers right now all carry question marks other than Cortland Sutton, don't they? I mean, when you talk about Mims, we're expecting a breakout season. We don't know that that's going to happen. And then Josh Reynolds, he's been typically a wide receiver 3 or 4. Tim Patrick coming off injuries, Troy Franklin, rookie, Devon Vele, rookie. So Cortland is the only guy who's really proven consistency over time. And I know he's had his issues in the past as well, but that to me indicates that the Broncos are in a position right now where they should hold firm and not trade him.
Broncos Country, we want to know how you feel and what you're thinking about the wide receiver room. Give us a look at your early depth chart. You can interact with us on social media at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos, or you could even get involved in the YouTube comment sections. We'll drop your thoughts there, whether you're listening or watching Locked On Broncos anywhere you get your podcast. Our conversation on today's mailbag edition of the show continues. It's Broncos Country asked the question, there's been a lot of change in terms of leadership roles on the defensive side of the ball. Who replaces Josie Jewell? Who calls the plays on the defense? We'll share our thoughts here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And look, the NFL schedule release is here, and that means that you need to figure out whether you live in Denver or whether you live elsewhere and you're a Broncos fan and you're wanting to catch a game on the road next season. Well, Game Time is the place to get tickets right away, because not only that, you get the best prices available inside the Game Time app with their best price guarantee, because if you find ticket prices cheaper elsewhere for the same section or same seat, they will give you 110% of the difference in credit. Now, here's the thing. If you're living in New Orleans, you want to know when Sean Payton is going to return to New Orleans, a place where he obviously won a Super Bowl with Drew Brees. Well, the Broncos, they'll play in New Orleans this season. You want to find tickets to that game? Well, you can get them inside of the Game Time app. And not to mention, you can also see the vantage point of what the action will be when you choose to attend a game with their seat view option inside of the app, which gives you a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you know exactly what the action is going to look like when you attend that game there. And on top of that, they have Game Time ticket coverage, where your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we'll dive deep into some of Broncos Country's remaining questions surrounding the defense, surrounding the inside linebacker position specifically. But first, we want to say thank you once again to all the everydayers out there who make us your first listen of the day. You can get Locked On Broncos once again for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. If you're not yet subscribed or you're not yet following the show, make sure you do that so you get daily Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more every single day all year long. We have you covered here, and we're getting excited because next week, look, more OTAs, more practice is going to be there. I'll be there at practice watching. We'll have recap here. We'll be able to share some things and some insight here with Broncos Country that, I think is going to lead to more excitement on the season. But let's continue our mailbag here. One of the questions comes in from PunkUs58 on Twitter. Ask the question here: who replaces the outlaw Josey Jewell at inside linebacker? And more importantly, who wears the green dot? And he kind of brings up in this question as well that, well, when you look at the loss of Justin Simmons, you look at the loss of Josey Jewell, those two guys did not play in that game against the Miami Dolphins last season, obviously led to the defense giving up 70 points. Who's going to be the green dot guy? And for those that don't know what the green dot is, that's the person who receives the play call from the coordinator through the headset. They echo that through the huddle. Obviously, that was Josey Jewell last year. Justin Simmons was the secondary guy to be able to do that if need be. And more importantly, Justin was also a guy who was really, really good at getting everybody lined up and in the right spot. So you lose those two guys. The question is, who takes over that responsibility this upcoming season? I think it's a fantastic question.
Great question. I think the answer off the top of my head has got to be Alex Singleton, right? Who's going to be the carryover in terms of playing that. It's usually an off-ball linebacker, Cody.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it's super common to see a safety wear the green dot out there, but Justin Simmons is kind of a rare breed at the position. But maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong in that. I just don't recall a ton of safeties being the defensive, the relayers of the play call. I think Alex Singleton is going to be that guy, and I think he's going to be effective at it. I think it's going to be different to see him out there kind of calling the shots and everything, because he's kind of been, especially when he was really effective in 2022, we saw him out there just kind of free flying around, making plays, attacking the line of scrimmage. It's a different role, isn't it, when you're wearing the green dot as opposed to when you're not. It's not just like two guys that are playing the exact same position, making the exact same reads, and one swapping the other. We've seen the Broncos actually struggle a bit when they've had to switch that up in the past and change guys' positions there. So I think ideally Singleton wears the dot and takes over Josey's role from last year, and Drew Sanders is the one that's out there kind of moving around the formation, just able to pin his ears back, for lack of a better term, and make some plays. Just read the line of scrimmage, attack the line and attack runners, the ball carrier, and be that heat-seeking missile. So that's what I see happening here. But I'm interested to know your thoughts. There could be guys like PJ Locke out there. I mean, what do you see as being the new defensive green dot player?
Yeah, I think it would be Alex Singleton. And look, I think a benefit that the Broncos have here, Alex has done it before. He did it when he was a member of the Philadelphia Eagles. It was no change for him. He's even told us that he's worn the green dot before. And really for him, it doesn't change how he prepares, but more so it's just like, all right, hey, I'm getting the call and I need to relay it. Now, I think one element that's probably under the radar here, Sayre, about inside linebacker that we really have to ask after the loss of Josie Jewell here is Alex and Josie both communicated last year at times, and they met with us in the locker room, and I talked to these guys. They've said that Josie and I, we can just look at each other. We can give each other a look and we know exactly like what we're going to do. We play well off of each other and understanding that. How do you get to that point now if you're Alex Singleton with another guy, whether that be a Drew Sanders, whether that be, Cody Barton or Jonas Griffith or Justin Sternad? Like, how do you get to that point with those guys? Because you saw it happen quickly with Josie and with obviously Alex, but now it's a little bit different because the responsibilities have changed. Josie was more of the solidified guy, like, hey, I've been on this defense. I've played in it for quite some time. I've been a starter for quite some time. And it's more so Alex was learning how to play with Josie. Well, now it's going to be Alex has to learn how to play with somebody else at this point. And how do you fit it into the defensive philosophy there? Now, in terms of maybe even on the secondary, I think PJ Locke can also do that. PJ is a very, very smart player, high football IQ. I think he's also learned a lot from Justin. Same thing with Caden. Like, I would have complete confidence if it was PJ or Caden at that position. I can't necessarily speak for Brandon Jones because I don't know what type of responsibilities Brandon really had in terms of whether or not he called the plays defensively. I don't think that was the case in Miami, but I mean, it could have been under, Brian Flores, or it could have been under Vic Fangio. I'm not entirely sure. But for me, there's definitely big questions here at the inside linebacker position. And I also think that's where kind of Pete, obviously, who's an avid listener of the show, asked the questions about who will be Denver starting inside linebackers this season. Will we get to see Drew Sanders? I think you shared yours that it's going to be, in your opinion, it's going to be Drew and it's going to be Alex. I think it can be Drew and Alex. I think ideally that would be the best case scenario for Denver as it pertains to player development and Drew Sanders taking that next step to where he needs to be, because right now we don't know where he's playing. I think that's a valid thing to throw out here early on, but these are all questions that we're going to have going into training camp. And we certainly probably aren't going to know this until maybe after game 2 of the NFL preseason, where things are at. We know at one point there's going to be the unofficial depth chart that comes out, right? And we're all going to look into it. We're all going to be like, okay, where does it go? Sean Payton will mess with us too, because he's even admitted that when he releases the depth chart, he's going to put certain guys somewhere just to get our heads spinning a little bit and to get the fans a little riled up. But ideally, after that second preseason game, I think that's where we're really going to figure out where the true clarity comes from the inside linebacker position here.
Which could include Cody Barton, right? I mean,
Yeah.
The free agent acquisition who came in, I think it's similar in terms of the vibe coming in to when Alex Singleton came over from the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, very few people in the Broncos fan base, except for the one guy who was commenting every time we talked about him. I forget who it was. So shout out to you for being right about Alex Singleton at the time. But there was very few people that were excited to get Singleton at the time, and there were very few people in the Philadelphia Eagles fan base that were sad to see him go. That didn't feel like a great signing. The Cody Barton move feels pretty similar. Not a lot of people talking about that as one of the premier signings the Broncos made, and not a lot of Commanders people or even Seahawks people are saying, hey, that's a great shrewd move there. He was really improving in our system. They're all pretty excited to see him fail, I guess, with the Denver Broncos. So hopefully you have another guy there that can be a floor raiser as opposed to somebody who, we're constantly dogging week after week on the show for being out of position or things like that. But Barton adds that athleticism that George Payton said the Broncos need at the position. He's a super athletic guy. Jonas Griffith, super athletic guy. So, and maybe this is a position group, Cody, too, where we have to look at those undrafted free agents. And I know the Fresno State kid has been,
under radar.
Under the radar, and somebody that people have been talking about as an option there. So I'm just saying, keep an eye there, maybe even a free agent pickup at some point the rest of the way this offseason.
We'll see how it all plays out. And look, Broncos Country, we're eager for your thoughts here on today's episode of the show. What did you think of the mailbag questions sent in on Bo Nix, the wide receiver room, and also the leadership on the defensive side of the ball? Make sure you share your thoughts with us if you're watching on YouTube or listening wherever you get your podcast. We always appreciate your insight and your interaction here. Broncos Country, what is coming up this week for the remainder? For all you everydayers out there, well, you know what? On Wednesday night, the NFL schedule release is going to come out. We are going to officially find out what the Broncos schedule will be. Thursday's episode, Locked On Broncos, you can expect a complete reaction to that, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into the schedule. We'll look at some of the key moments, toughest stretches, and much more. You can expect that and much more all throughout this week here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. We'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.